Experimentation Conference 2022. We're here again this year. Let's go. We are talking about pre-test planning as the redheaded stepchild of experimentation. This is a theme now that I have seen for quite a while, and it is a hot topic on my brain lately. And I do want to say that the title is only from a silly saying that we have here in the US, with no offense to redheads intended, no idea where the saying came from, but it does speak well to the point that I'm trying to make, in that pre-test planning is truly a very forgotten about conversation in experimentation programs across all kinds of teams. I've seen it time and time again, and I want to solve this. I don't want this to be a forgotten thing anymore. It is mysterious to a lot of people, and I'm here to clear it up today, hopefully once and for all to some extent, but I guess we'll see. I am Haley Carpenter. I manage our strategy consulting team here in North America at Optimizely. I have been in the industry for a minute now at those three places. I spent some time at Hannafin Marketing. I then moved to Spiro, and now I'm here at Optimizely. I also love LinkedIn. I have my link there. Please reach out and connect. Follow me. I put content out, and I love that network. So don't be scared. Connect with me, DM me. I love hearing from people, and also following new people with content and cool stuff as well. But let's set the stage around this conversation of pre-test planning. Imagine you are with your team building an experimentation program, or maybe you've started doing that already, and maybe you're deep into the weeds and you're not quite seeing what you want. I work with a lot of folks over the months, and I've been doing that for quite a while now. And usually when teams come to me, somehow, for some reason, a number of people have this about some things. Usually there are some things going really well, but then they also have some struggles that gets this type of reaction. Where it's like, Haley, what can we do? We're really hung up on this, or we're just not seeing the right things here, or whatever the case is. These are some of the common struggles that I see contributing to that, leading to that reaction on the previous slide. Lots of hangups around test duration. Haley, how long are my tests going to take to run? Where can I run them? Are they going to run for the same amount of time across my whole website? Idea sizes. So maybe they're like, oh, we thought this was a really good idea. We even backed it up with research. Why didn't this work? And that all ties into road mapping with, oh, we have all these initiatives. Maybe you've prioritized them, but how do we fit all these pieces together, keep track of it? And hitting significance absolutely ties into all of these struggles and topics as well around, again, oh, we had this really good idea. We even backed it up with research. It's been running forever. We thought it was going to be pretty quick. We ultimately didn't even hit significance. How can we fix that? What is going on? Why is this happening? And there are tools and processes and things that we can do to help with all of these qualms, if not totally solve them. And it's not mysterious, but a lot of people think that it is, and it really should not be. And around this concept of the struggles and not getting significance and struggling with durations and idea sizes, I will say that some of you may have heard this term spaghetti testing, but I will say that there are still a lot of teams and programs being ran in this spaghetti testing type fashion, when that's the last thing that we want to do. I want to break teams of that. I don't want to see it anymore. And if you're like, Haley, why are you talking about pasta right now? That's very weird. What does this have to do with anything here in a professional setting? Let me quickly explain. So if you've made spaghetti before, you're probably familiar with the concept of, if it's done, you can pick out a noodle, fling it up in the wall, and if it sticks, that tells you and confirms that the noodles are done. But if it falls off the wall, then you got to boil it longer. And a lot of programs are just simply picking idea noodles and making choices that are, we can call noodles in this case, picking them out of their pot. They're flinging them up at the wall and just hoping that it sticks and that they're doing the right thing. We really don't have to operate programs that way. We shouldn't be doing it, and we don't have to, I promise. So let's move away from this. And around all those struggles that I showed, this is where pre-test planning comes into play. It saves the day. It's got a cape and everything. In a way, I feel so strongly about it that I do attach it to a hero, as you can see in the photo. So it's a big deal. I put a lot of stock into it. And when I do trainings, I say, if you have ignored every single thing before now that I have said, and you ignore me in the future, don't ignore me right now on these slides in this conversation. Please pay attention and remember what we are covering here and nail it. Become proficient at pre-test planning and understand the pieces and how to do it and how to do it as a team. So it does come in with a cape. It's a big topic. And in the context of a whole program, lots of teams, even particularly a little bit higher maturity, maybe mid-level, they have this puzzle of their program, right? They have a lot of the pieces. And I will say that that pre-test planning puzzle piece is usually one that is still missing. We can fix that. I'm here to fix that. I'm giving you that final piece. So hopefully you can put that into your puzzle and either complete it or go focus on some other pieces that are missing. So you might be thinking, you've said the word pre-test planning quite a bit. What does that mean? What does that entail tactically? Can you please just jump into it? And here we go. Like I keep saying, it seems to be this giant mystery, and it really shouldn't be. It doesn't have to be. And we can cover this here today. So teams struggle with it. Let's get into it. Pre-test planning. When I say that, I'm talking primarily about two specific things listed here. One of those is MDE and MDE estimations. And you're like, what is MDE? What does that stand for? That is minimum detectable effect. And that is essentially saying how much of an impact does our variation need to have in this test that we want to run to get a significant result, positive or negative. We don't care about direction here. It just is this idea that I want to test, is this variation that I want to run going to cause a big enough of an impact for me to get those significant results? Because that's what we want, right? At the end of a test, at the end of particularly superiority tests, we are looking for significance and data that we can trust and be confident in and know that it's not due to random chance and that the impact and the deltas that we're seeing are real. And so that we can pivot and make those decisions and take action. Whereas if we don't get significance in superiority tests, then we're still just kind of guessing, right? And that's not what we want. So MDE is very important. We can estimate this beforehand. So let's say we have a homepage test. We know, okay, can we do a small change like a copy change or an image swap or a video ad? Or do we have to swing bigger? Do we need to go for redesigns, section redesigns, reskins, and somewhere on that side? And that's the thing that I frequently don't see in conversations around test planning and beforehand, before we launch anything, people aren't talking about idea size. They're not gauging this and really in any kind of way. And they're just flinging things out there again, like spaghetti noodles, and hoping that it's the right thing. We can be very intentional about this. So that's one. Two is duration estimates. And most teams want to know about how long a test is going to run. No one really would want to know that, right? We want to be able to communicate out and plan and have roadmaps and gather ideas from different teams and be able to coordinate all of that. And there are actually ways that we can do it and be very strategic and methodical about it. And so those are the two big things that I'm talking about that I mean when I say pre-test planning. And so to do this, I have a very reliable handy dandy tool that I have found to be the best that I've seen to date. And that is CXL's pre-test calculator. I have a screenshot here and I have the link over there on the right side of the slide. It's a public tool. Anyone can go check this out. If you go to the URL, you'll see a toggle up here. The default will show a post-test analysis calculator. So for pre-test planning, make sure you hop over into this pre-test analysis calculator. And it is pretty straightforward and simple to use. It might look kind of weird and like a lot and confusing at this outset, but I promise you it is pretty straightforward to use. There are other calculators out there, including one that Optimizely has, but I'll speak to those here in a minute. For now, stick with me and hang with CXL's calculator, and then we can kind of venture out. But when we get here, let's say for the sake of this example, we have a homepage test that we're wanting to run. We're not quite sure how long it's going to run. We have an idea, but we're not sure if the swing size of it is large enough. I have some more info here in a second to speak to that more as well. But what we can do is, let's say we come in here and let's say we want to run it on desktop, because we usually segment by device, right? So homepage, desktop test. You come in here to chart 1. All you need are 2 numbers. That's it from your analytics data. I'll say GA because that's a very common tool. So you would go into GA, Google Analytics. You would pull the last 7 days of users or sessions for your homepage on desktop and plug that in here. Whether you use sessions or users, it just depends on your use case. So use whatever makes sense for you. Put that number in there. Remember, it is last 7 days, not last 30. And then you will pull the last 7 days of conversions for your primary metric that you're going to use in the test. So just for the sake of example, let's say we're going to use transactions. I would pull the last 7 days of those. Put that number in here. And that's it to start. That's all you need to get the outputs from this calculator. Do note that there is that third field in chart 1. You don't have to touch that to get started. You can leave it at 2. That is saying, okay, this test, let's try the control in just one variation. So a true A/B test. That will spit out a chart. Let's click on the link here. And I will share my screen to the actual calculator. And boom. So let's say that we have our data in here. I'll put in some dummy data. There we go. And now we're in this pretest calculator. So let's say I have 10,000 sessions for my homepage on desktop. 500 transactions for the last 7 days. Again, leave this at 2. We can play with that. That is a lever, but let's just leave it at 2 for now. And then we get this output in the chart. You can play with confidence level here and statistical power, but just don't touch those for now. If you don't know what those are, that's a whole other session and thing to dive into. So there's plenty of content out there. Read about maybe how you can play with those levers, but let's just leave them here for now. And then this far right column, it's there. I don't ever really care about it that much. It's not necessarily that helpful, not what I need. So I care about the 2 middle columns. And what this is telling me is estimated duration and MDE in parallel. And I will look at them in parallel. Do note that at least in relation to the Optimizely tool, which I'm going to call out first because I work here, this calculator is not built specifically for Optimizely's stats engine, which is set up differently than most other testing platforms. So know that this is not going to be exact in relation to Optimizely, but it is also not going to be exact in any case for other tools as well. So anytime we do this, take the calculations with a grain of salt, but they are still enough that we should do them, be able to rely on them enough to do pre-test planning and get good enough roundabout answers. So keep that in mind. But now let's start looking at the output. So start with 1 week and that MDE. Minimum is 2 weeks for most tools, so you might just go ahead and start at 2 weeks. But in Optimizely, in theory, it is possible for a test to run just 1 week. So we can start at 1, we'll work down. Just know roundabout what your approach should be depending on what testing tool you have. But let's start at 1. So this is saying on my homepage desktop test, if I run the test for 1 week, I need to create an impact, positive or negative, remember, of about 22.5%. So that is a pretty large swing. Actually, that's what I would just say. We need to take a huge swing. I have a cheat sheet on this here in a couple of slides, so hang with me and I'll add some more context. But know that that's a huge swing. So then let's take it down to 2 weeks, because the more time we add, the lower that MDE gets and the more attainable it is, right? Because the lower the impact I have to create, the more likely it is I'm going to be able to do that, the easier it is to do. So the lower the MDE, the better. This is an art and a science. It can be a little bit muddy, so know that. But let's see if we can get that MDE a bit lower than 22.5, because that's pretty high. So 2 weeks. What if I add a week? Now I have to create an impact of about 15.7%. Definitely better than 22.5, but still pretty high, still taking a large swing. So you do that row by row. Let's just extrapolate this out. Let's just jump down. Let's say 6 weeks. I'm going to run this homepage desktop test. Now I have to create an impact of about 9%. Much, much more attainable than 22.5%. Much more likely that I will hit that with the change that I'm making. I would say that's about a medium-sized swing in most cases. So it doesn't go up to 8 weeks, but you can extrapolate it out a little bit further. So let's say 8 weeks, maybe about 7%. That is even more attainable. So keep that in mind as you kind of read through this. The more time you add, MDE goes down, the easier it is to hit significance. And so then you try and judge, right, based on all of the information that you know and the different levers that you're pulling about where the test might land. So if I was a practitioner running this test, I would say, okay, my homepage desktop test is going to take about 6 to 8 weeks, and I need to test something that's going to create about a 7 to 9% impact, if not more than that. Above and beyond is always great, but at a minimum about 7 to 9%. So I need to take a medium-sized swing with my idea. Now, for the sake of the example, let's say this is a bit better and we have 5,000 conversions. So the more data you have to play with, the more you can play with this lever, which is the number of variations you have in your test. The more data you have, the more variations you can typically run, and the easier it is to hit that impact, to hit that MDE, because they will be lower the more data that you have to play with. So in this case, if this was my output and I was a higher traffic site, then I'd say, okay, what if I did 2 variations? 6 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe about 3 to 4.5% at the long side. Keep trying it out. What if I have 3 variations, 4 or 5, and eventually you'll be like, okay, we're good. But find where that max is, because we always want to have that maxed out when we can to get the most bang for our buck. So that is another lever you can play with. Like I said, remember, you can play with these 2, but that's a different session. You can do some reading if you want on how you can play with those, what those mean, and how those affect your test. But for now, focus on the middle 2 columns in this lever up here. So this then has now told us estimated duration and estimated idea size that we need. And then when we have our idea and we finalize it, and let's say it's a large test, we got to swing big, then we can even plan out approximately design times, maybe, and dev times and QA times, and really start taking into account what the full kind of process and timeline and potential impact will be, and all the things that we want to know, right? So let's jump away from this calculator for a minute, back into the slides, because we all love slides. And here we go. So now that is the calculator. On the MDE test size and what to aim for and how big of a swing to take, I'll show this calculator. And then a common question is, well, how do you know it's small, medium, large, and not viable? This is my cheat sheet. These are the ranges that I have used. These are the ranges that I've seen a lot of analysts use. And note that these ranges are guesstimations. Again, take them with a grain of salt, and know that these are based on using more down funnel metrics most of the time. Whereas if you start using higher funnel metrics where you add more data to play with, these ranges might and probably would change and be a little bit more generous. But no, just these are mostly based on down funnel metrics because that is usually what I prefer to use. And that's a whole other can of worms and a debate among practitioners of what should be a primary metric. But know that these are based on that. And then you'll see I have the little note that not viable is 25% plus. Again, guesstimation just based on my experience. But usually if it's around like 20, 25, 30 plus, you can actually just go ahead and rule that testing lane out because that is pretty unattainable, pretty uncommon. But again, if you're using something like button clicks or click-throughs or page views, as opposed to something down funnel like transactions or MQLs or form fills, those bigger MDE numbers are typically easier to hit and a bit more forgiving. So no, just please know that these do flex and are, again, just a roundabout, but keep in mind relative to your use case. And then these are some common ideas around those swing sizes. So let's say you've done your calculations and you know you need to take a medium-sized swing. Well, Haley, what is a medium-sized swing? These are some common options, common breakdowns. So maybe you do some nav changes. Maybe you introduce a new pop-up. Maybe you do a painted door test, where some smaller tests are typically like copy changes, imagery, videos, button designs, colors, changing the order of things, just removing something. And then large swings or huge swings are totally new functionalities, new modals, positioning, redesigns, new pages, new products, super complex flow changes, big lifts. And so hopefully this helps kind of place into context what we mean when we say swing size. And going back to that calculator, remember how it just went to 6 weeks? And I was like, let's take it to 8, just try and extrapolate to 8. Know that we don't want to go past 8 weeks. That's a best practice usually in the industry across the board. We can start to get data contamination after 8 weeks. So please don't run a test for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. Cap them at 8 weeks. That's it. And here's where I'm going to reference other calculators that you might see, even Optimizely sample size calculator. There are a lot of sample size calculators out there. Don't rely on those. When someone says, oh, well, we have the sample size calculator, that's my face, and it kind of morphs into a frown, and it's just, okay. I'm glad that you have at least been trying to use some calculator and have awareness of calculators beforehand, but sample size calculators are not as helpful as I think they should be. You can still back your way in to this same sort of information, but it's just more difficult. Really, what we're looking for is an MDE calculator, or like an MDE/duration calculator, if you want to think of it that way. And I think that's a lot better approach to pre-test planning and just makes our lives easier. For example, in Optimizely sample size calculator, the MDE is an input where it's arbitrary. You're maybe putting in the MDE that you would like to see, or you have to play with that MDE as a lever. We're looking for MDE as an output, right? We don't put it in. So know that sample size calculators are out there. CXL's pretest calculator even had visitors per variant, right? In that far right column where I was just like, ignore that. It's not really what I'm looking for. So that's my spiel on those. And then there is a bit of a third piece here to pretest planning, but not kind of as big of something that I want to mention because there is more awareness around other test metadata usually. But this also falls into planning, right? Of geography. So if I'm running a test over here in the US, maybe I can run something different in Brazil, or maybe somewhere in like Australia. So we can roadmap and plan and avoid unnecessary overlap and make sure that we're maxing out velocities. And when we look at things like geography and device, channels and sources, different user segments, also think about how you want to launch the test if you want to have 100% traffic allocation and just put it out there to all of the users within a segment that you're testing with, or if you want to do a slower roll up. And then test type. So is it a superiority test? Are we looking for a truly superior variation at significance? Is it a non-inferiority or risk mitigation type test? What is the test setup? Is it AB, ABN, multivariate, multi-arm banded? We want to make sure and have all of these details now nailed down in the pre-test process, in the planning process for devs and designers and everyone to be on the same page, right? So have all of this figured out. And with this, please have those MDEs and those test duration estimates. And so now, let's say you have all of your calculations and your metadata, you've done it for homepage, desktop, mobile, PDPs, desktop, mobile, category pages, desktop, mobile, cart, desktop, mobile, checkout, desktop, mobile. You've done it for all the places, right? And I reference lanes that are usually owned by marketing teams on like marketing sites. But we also can test in product side, right? So whatever, you have there, do it for those, or wherever, we own the code base, we can test. So if you can run those pre-test calculations, if you have the data available to do it. So let's say you've done this. Now what do? Road mapping. And this is usually, I've seen it done best in Gantt charts. It's my favorite way to do it. I'm very visual as well, and this is a very visual tool. So now that we have all of that, let's say we have our example swim lanes here, like site-wide, homepage, PDPs, paid landing pages. And you do those calculations. I usually say you only need to do them about once a quarter. So, because they're not going to change usually day to day, week to week over a couple of months, right? And so once you run them, that's the cool part is that you can just note them of like homepage, desktop, 6 to 8 weeks, medium swing, approximate MDE, and then everyone can reference that. So not everyone has to run all these pre-test calculations all the time. So let's say you have that, and your site-wide tests are going to take 2 weeks, homepage 4 to 6, PDPs 3, paid landing pages 8. And now we can actually map that out in months, right? Across weeks. So you can do a whole quarter of tests in a swim lane, or you could do a whole month. Or maybe even a whole year if you're really, really ambitious. Granted, that will probably change over time, but nonetheless. And so then let's say Susie Q comes to you or Bill comes to you and is like, hey, I have this test. When can we run it? It's urgent. You can say, well, in that swim lane, we're booked all the way through mid-January. So I can launch it mid-January and it's going to take about, 2 to 4 weeks. So it can probably end around X date. Or if it's super urgent, then okay, I can bump back this, and this, fit it in here. And now we're booked out through the end of March, whatever the case may be. So now you can get super strategic with it, right? And do that for all of your swim lanes. And then you're off to the races. So you should be kind of answering a lot of those questions and struggles that I covered at the beginning. 2 final pieces that I want to cover here are a lot of teams assume that, we can test everywhere, or the question is, should we test everywhere? Can we test everywhere? And going back to the spaghetti testing, a lot of teams are just assuming that, we can test everywhere and everyone can do these efforts. When in reality, the answer to that question is probably not. You should probably not be testing everywhere unless you have so much traffic and you're the huge brands of the world, like the Nikes and the Amazons and the Walmarts, and the huge brands, where usually if you're not, you fall somewhere on a sliding scale under that. And there are even teams that are so low traffic where we shouldn't even be experimenting at all. We shouldn't be paying for a testing tool. We shouldn't be paying for an experimentation team to specifically do just this work, but we can get an idea of that with these pre-test plans and these calculations. And that answer is, should we even test at all? And it really does just depend. But sometimes the answer is no. And we want to figure that out, right? Before we go purchase a really expensive testing tool and build out this staff to run this program that maybe shouldn't exist in the first place. And then you're going to get yourself in some hot water. And I have seen that, and it's no fun for anyone. So this is also why I'm so passionate about this, is because we can answer these questions. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are not answering them or thinking about them. And so I do want to say, the higher the MDE, the more you're gambling. And I say that in reference to, should we be testing everywhere or even testing at all? So if you are on the verge of, maybe not doing it or doing it at a higher velocity, just know that it plays a lot into the MDE estimations and the data that feeds into that calculator. And the higher you let that MDE go and the more you let that happen across the board as you're making these judgments, truly the more you are gambling, and you're having a lot of faith that you can maybe consistently enough hit those 30% MDEs and create 30, 40, 50% impacts if you choose to, kind of place your bets on that. And so I would say I've seen a lot of teams gamble. It shouldn't be, y'all. It's not fun. And this is an example scenario on paper to that, where it's major thumbs down, where if this is what your calculations look like across the board, and these are the only places that you are looking to test, and everything comes out maxed out at 8 weeks, and you see these crazy high MDEs. In this case, if you are a high stakes, risky person and you really want to push forward, you might be like, well, I'm going to do it. One test every 8 weeks on the home page, one test every 8 weeks on the category page. Hopefully you wouldn't go beyond that. Then you have maybe a test and a half, a quarter ending, and probably not hitting significance and finding wins on those very frequently. Very arguably somewhere you shouldn't be testing, a company and a team that shouldn't be testing yet until you get some more traffic and maybe more conversion somehow along the way to increase that input into the calculator. Roll the dice how you want. That's all I'll say. So let's wrap it up here. I hope I've convinced you that pre-test planning is of the utmost importance. Hopefully I've demystified it for you, at least enough to get you in and attempting it and start dabbling with it and start rolling it out to your team and get people thinking about it. To wrap up, before a test, please always run your pre-test calculations. Have those on hand. Like I said, I usually refresh them about once a quarter for all of my swim lanes and all of my segments, and then you just have those on file for the team to use. So have them before your tests, incorporate them into your test documentation, know the MDE, the duration estimates, other metadata, have a roadmap, use the roadmap, put the stuff into the roadmap, and then always gauge how much risk is involved in those borderline situations, even between going from like a small, medium to a medium to large test. There's some gauging of that involved. And so with that, I hope you have sighed a little bit of relief at the end of this, now being able to better tackle and address some of those struggles and those qualms that the team have day to day and week to week, where we're going from the reaction and the reaction, I don't know what to do, or you're confused, to, okay, we've got this. We've got this a little bit more than we did yesterday, a little bit more than we did before this talk. Know that it does take some practice. You might have to come back and watch this recording and do a little bit of research from time to time until you get the hang of it, but it's going to be okay. Pre-test planning is where it's at, y'all. Don't forget it.